Chapter 14: Law, Order, and Conspiracies in Alaska. 1. Legal status of the District of Alaska, the role of Congress. By the dawn of 1900, Alaska remained a legal specter on the American map, a vast frozen non-place that existed in a state of perpetual legislative neglect. Since its purchase from Russia in 1867, the United States Congress had treated the territory not as a burgeoning wing of the Republic, but as a remote warehouse of resources. Alaska was neither a state nor a fully organized territory, it was merely a district. This technicality was a vacuum of power. It meant there was no local legislature, no right to vote for the men who governed it, and no coherent body of civil law to protect the thousands of dreamers who were suddenly flooding its shores. When the gold find at Nome transformed from a local rumor into a global stampede, this lack of infrastructure triggered a crisis of sovereignty. Thousands of miners, armed with nothing but location notices and Winchester rifles, found themselves in a land where the only law was camp custom, a fragile ad hoc system of miners' meetings that often teetered on the edge of mob rule. Washington, D.C., pressured by the sheer scale of the chaos and the lobbying of powerful industrial interests, finally responded in June 1900 with the Alaska Civil Code, the Carter Bill. However, this legislation was less a shield for the innocent and more a blueprint for exploitation. The code divided Alaska into three massive judicial divisions, designating Nome as the seat of the second division. The fatal flaw of the bill lay in its ambiguity. It granted federally appointed judges nearly monarchical power over property disputes, and it left a deliberate cavernous gray area regarding the rights of aliens, foreign-born miners, to hold claims. For the political vultures in the capital, this was an invitation. Congress had ostensibly brought law to the Bering Sea, but in reality it had created a legal wilderness, where the title to $1 million gold mine could be erased by the stroke of a corrupt pen. 2. The Great Judicial Conspiracy of 1900-1901. The arrival of the year 1900 brought more than just miners to the shores of Nome. It brought a predatory political machine. At the center of this web was Alexander McKenzie, a powerful Republican National Committeeman from North Dakota. McKenzie saw in the legal vacuum of Alaska an opportunity for a corporate heist of unprecedented proportions. He organized the Alaska Gold Mining Company in New York, a shell corporation backed by influential senators. His goal was not to mine the earth, but to mine the miners, by legally seizing the richest claims in Nome, specifically those belonging to the three Lucky Swedes and other foreign-born prospectors. The conspiracy relied on a twisted interpretation of the new Alaska Civil Code. McKenzie argued that because the discoverers of the Anvil Creek mines were not U.S. citizens at the time of their find, their titles were void. But he didn't wait for a legal trial to prove this. Instead, he utilized his political influence to hand-pick the administrative and judicial staff for the newly created Second Division of Alaska. By the time the steamship Senator reached Nome in July 1900, McKenzie arrived not as a businessman, but as the hidden architect of a shadow government. He brought with him a hand-picked judge, a submissive district attorney, and a compliant marshal, creating a closed circuit of corruption that effectively suspended the U.S. Constitution upon landing. The Great Conspiracy was executed with terrifying efficiency. Within hours of his arrival, McKenzie's legal team filed suits against the most productive mines in the district. Rather than allowing the rightful owners to defend their property, the newly installed court immediately appointed a receiver to manage the mines and collect the gold, while the litigation was pending. That receiver, by no coincidence, was Alexander McKenzie himself. This was a judicial coup d'etat. Under the color of law, the gold was being shoveled directly from the sluice boxes of the pioneers into the private vaults of a political syndicate. 3. Judge Arthur H. Noyes and the Administrative Tangle. If Alexander McKenzie was the architect of the conspiracy, Judge Arthur H. Noyes was its blunt instrument. A man of weak character and heavy debts, Noyes was appointed through McKenzie's influence, specifically to act as a judicial rubber stamp. Upon his arrival in Nome, Noyes bypassed all standard legal procedures. He refused to hear motions to vacate his orders, ignored evidence of citizenship, and denied the miners the right to appeal his decisions to higher courts. His courtroom became a place of theater, where the script was written in Mackenzie's private quarters. The resulting administrative tangle paralyzed the district. The legitimate miners, realizing that the law had been weaponized against them, found themselves in a state of desperate limbo. They were forbidden from working their own claims, while Mackenzie's hired crews stripped the mines of their wealth. Noyes's refusal to grant supersedious, a stay of proceedings, meant that even if the miners won in a distant future, the gold would be long gone. This created an atmosphere of explosive tension in Nome. The White City was on the verge of an armed uprising. The legal system, designed to prevent violence, had become the primary inciter of it, as the Noyes Court operated as a private collection agency for the Mackenzie syndicate. We now enter the climax of this judicial drama. The tension in Nome reaches a breaking point as the legal wilderness is finally confronted by the highest authorities of the American Republic. 4. The United States Court of Appeals, Intervention and Justice. By late 1900, the atmosphere in Nome was thick with the scent of gunpowder and desperation. The three Lucky Swedes and their legal team, led by the relentless attorney Samuel Knight, realized that seeking justice in Judge Noyes's courtroom was like pleading for mercy from a hangman. In a daring move, Knight managed to smuggle a petition for a writ of supersedious out of the Arctic and down to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco. When the appellate judges read the transcripts of Noyes's court, they were horrified. They saw not a court of law, but a criminal enterprise wearing a black robe. The Ninth Circuit issued an immediate order for Mackenzie to return the gold and cease his operations. However, in an act of staggering defiance, Alexander McKenzie refused to obey. He believed he was untouchable, protected by his high-ranking friends in Washington. He physically barred the owners from their mines and continued to shovel gold into his private safes. This was the moment the administrative tangle became a constitutional crisis. The Ninth Circuit responded by sending 2 federal marshals on the last steamer of the season. The scene was cinematic. The marshals marched into the golden vaults of the Alaska Banking and Safe Deposit Company, where Mackenzie stood guard. In front of a stunned crowd of miners, they arrested the most powerful political boss in the North. Mackenzie was forced onto a ship bound for a San Francisco prison, still clutching the keys to the gold safes in his pocket. It was the first time the long arm of the law had reached across the Bering Sea to strike down a titan of corruption. 5. Mining claims and the battle for mineral rights. The arrest of Mackenzie did not immediately bring peace. It ignited a frenzied battle for mineral rights that would clog the courts for years. With the shadow government decapitated, thousands of miners rushed to revalidate their claims. The central legal question remained: who owns the gold? The debate shifted from the alienage of the discoverers to the very definition of a discovery. In the tundra and on the beach, men fought over the apex law, a complex legal doctrine stating that if a vein of gold surfaced on your claim, you could follow it underground, even if it led beneath your neighbor's property. In Nome, this led to subterranean warfare. Neighbors would sink shafts side by side, listening through the frozen walls for the sound of the other's pickaxe. If they crossed paths, it often ended in brawls or underground injunctions, where pits were flooded or smoke-bombed to drive away rivals. The beach, meanwhile, remained a legal anomaly. Because it was public land, the courts eventually ruled that no one could own it. But everyone had the right to mine as long as they were physically present. This created a culture of possessory title. Your claim was only as good as your ability to defend it with a shovel or a gun. The battle for mineral rights in Nome eventually forced the United States to modernize its mining laws. The chaos proved that the old 1872 Mining Act was insufficient for the industrial scale of the 20th century. By the time Judge Noyes was finally removed from the bench and fined for contempt, the landscape of Alaska had been permanently altered. The conspiracy had failed, but it had left a legacy of skepticism toward federal authority that persists in the North to this day. The gold was no longer just a mineral. It was a legal precedent, won in the highest courts and defended in the deepest, coldest mud on earth.